So our topic for today is we are going to be adding, subtracting, and multiplying real numbers. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is adding and subtracting. So we're going to talk about primarily, it's easy enough. We can add simple numbers. We can put things in our calculator. The issue comes when we have negatives. That always seems to be the issue, when we have to deal with negatives. So first of all, I've got adding one positive and one negative. Now you can put this in your calculator, no problem, but I want to show you how to do things mentally, because you can do it faster mentally than you can putting them in your calculator. That means your homework takes less time. Alright? 5 plus negative 9. Anytime you have one positive and one negative, the trick here, take the big one minus the small one. Alright? So 9 minus 5, that gives us 4. We know that. Now, your answer gets the sign of the bigger number. So it gets the negative sign of the 9. Now, keep in mind, 5 plus a negative 9 is the same as 5 minus 9. Don't put this in your calculator. That's extra keystrokes. Put this in your calculator if you have numbers that you need to put in your calculator. Alright? If you have plus a negative, change it to a minus when you put it in your calculator. Alright, next one. I've got negative 5 plus 9. As always, take the bigger minus the smaller. 9 minus 5 is 4. And gets a sign of the bigger number 9, which is positive, so it's going to be a positive 4. You can, because we're adding, use your commutative property and switch the order. If you switch the order, you'll see that this is actually 9 plus negative 5, which we just learned is the same as 9 minus 5. Now we're in second grade math. This is super easy. All right? And if you're dealing with numbers that are bigger, it's easy to put them in your calculator. Now, what if we have two negative numbers? Here's the mental trick to use when you have two negative numbers. If you are adding two negative numbers, just add the two numbers. 5 and 9, that gives you 14. 14 will then be negative if you have two negative numbers. Alright? That's the mental trick there. Just don't forget that negative. That's the big thing that gets forgotten. Alright, flip the page. Here is when the issues come. Subtracting negative numbers. Now look at all the negatives we got. First of all, putting this in your calculator is just destined for problems, all right? Because your calculator has a negative key and it has a minus key. They are not the same things. So, here's what I want to tell you. When you are subtracting a negative, it is the same, we know this, as adding a positive. So really, what this is negative 5 plus 9. We have plenty of methods that we can do this. One of the things we can do, since we're adding, switch the order, and this now becomes 9 minus 5, which is 4. A quick trip over to the box here. Keep in mind, negative 8 is positive 8. Negative 1.8 is positive 1.8. These are easy. This is when it comes into play that we don't always think of it. If you have negative x, positive x. If you have something like this, simplify in the parentheses first. Alright? We have 7 minus 9. That's the same as 7 plus negative 9. Take the 9 minus the 7, that's 2. Bigger number is negative, so it's going to be negative 2. So this is negative 2, which is 2. All mental. Super quick. Now, here's a longer problem, and there are two ways that we can handle a problem like this. One is, we can chunk this whole thing into our calculator. But if we do that, let's not put negatives in, all right? If you're going to put this in your calculator, you are going to start out with negative 14 plus 9. Change the plus and negative to minus 12 plus 20. Change the plus and negative to minus 8. That's what you can put in your calculator. Less keystrokes, and anytime you have less keystrokes, that's less possibility of error. And those are the mistakes that you hate to make, because those are the points you didn't have to lose. All right, when it comes time for a test. Points you didn't have to lose. All right? Now, method 2, use the commutative and associative properties that we learned and we talked about this morning to group the negative numbers together. All right? That's one way to approach this. All right? So, for example, 1, 2, 3 negative numbers. If I group them together, I've got negative 14 plus negative 12 plus negative 8, and now I'll put the positives together. All right? I can use my associative property and do these together and do these together. And if we remember about the negatives, all I need to do is add these up. I actually can add them mentally because they work out super nice. 8 and 12, 20. 20 and 14, 34. So this is negative 34 plus 9 and 20 gives us 29. Now, this is easy. Take the big number minus the small number. 34 minus 29 is 5. It gets the sign of the bigger number. All right? So you can do this completely mentally. You don't have to get out a calculator. All right, let's go to the next page. And the next page is important because we're going to apply adding and subtracting knowledge to doing this with variables. So first of all, let's go over some vocabulary, and I'll bring the vocabulary up here. A term is any part of an expression that is separated by addition or subtraction. So that problem we just did with those 5 numbers all added together, those were 5 terms, all right? In this particular expression, this is a term, this is a term, and this is a term. It's anything that's added or subtracted together. Now, remember, like terms or similar terms are terms that contain the exact same variables and the exact same powers of those variables. So example, 2xy and negative 3xy are similar terms because they both have exactly the same variables and the same powers, all right? Now, the coefficient, this is important, is the number in front of the variables in a term. So, right here, the coefficient is 2. Right here, the coefficient is negative 3. That's what a coefficient is. It's the numbers in front of the variables. So, as another example, 5 is the coefficient of the term 5x squared y. That's what a coefficient is. Combining like terms. We can combine, which actually means add or subtract, only those terms that are similar by adding or subtracting the coefficients of the similar terms. So if we go back here to 2xy and negative 3xy, we can combine these by taking the 2 plus negative 3 gives us negative 1, and our answer would be negative 1xy. And we'll write it like this. So 2xy plus negative 3xy equals negative 1xy. Anytime you have a coefficient that has 1 or negative 1, you don't need the 1 to be present. You can write this as simply negative xy. And if you see negative xy, know that the coefficient is really negative 1. Now, let me ask you a question about like terms. Answer me this. I have like versus unlike. Let me ask you. I have, how about this? 2x squared y. And let's add 7y squared. Like or unlike?
What like?
Like. It doesn't matter that the variables are in a different order. They are still like because they have the same variables and the same powers, which means we can combine them. So we would add the 2 plus the 7 and get 9, and this is 9 x squared y. Now when you're working on your work, whenever you're dealing with terms, put the variables in alphabetical order. The reason is, sometimes when you look at this, you don't think that they are like terms because they look different, but really they are like terms. All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, so that being said, let's go back up here to simplify by combining like terms. All right, anyone guess what the very first step to simplifying this is? Distribute. So 3 times 4x gives us 12x. 3 times negative 9 gives us minus 27, plus 2x, plus 1. Now we're going to look for like terms.
12x and 2x.
12x and 2x. Combine those by adding the coefficients, and I get 14x. Then I have negative 27 and positive 1, which will give me negative 26. And I'm done. These I cannot combine further because this has an x, this does not. If you have a number that doesn't have any variables, do you know the math term for this?
A real number.
How about a constant? It's called a constant. All right, now let's go over here to products. First of all, we've got a couple of properties of multiplication. So in essence, they are rules. Some we talked about, and some we haven't. So for example, the multiplicative property of 0. We know this, we haven't talked about it yet, but any number times 0 is 0. All right? Sometimes 0 doesn't look like 0, however. So let me give you an example that doesn't look like it, but is. So how about if we had looks ugly,
Yeah.
but we know
That's
that
0.
this is 0 because any number and its opposite add is 0. 0 times anything equals 0. So this whole thing is 0. Now, we already talked about the identity property of multiplication. Any number times 1 is itself. All right? Then we have the multiplicative property of negative 1. Any number times negative 1 is its opposite. All right? Let's go through something we learned a long time ago. When you multiply two positives, you get a positive answer. When you multiply two negatives, you get a positive answer. If you have one positive and one negative, or one negative and one positive, you get a negative answer. Now, if you have a whole bunch of numbers multiplied together, there is a general rule. If you have an even number of negatives, each 2 will become positive, so your answer is positive. If you have an odd number of negatives, each 2 will become a positive. You'll have 1 negative left over, so your answer will be negative. All right, so if you have 5 numbers multiplied together, count up how many negatives you have. And you'll know right away what your answer is going to be. So let's do some examples here at the bottom of the page. First of all, in A, is my answer going to be positive or negative? Negative. 3 negatives multiplied together. Odd number gives you a negative. When you are multiplying terms, all right, this is this simple. We're going to take all of our coefficients, we're going to pretend they're positive because we already figured out the sign of our answer, and we're going to multiply those. 5 times 2 is 10 times 6 is 60. Now, we're going to multiply our variables. I've got r times s gives me rs. I do not need to put the little dot for a multiplication symbol in here. It's simply negative 60 rs. If you are in the habit of putting the dot or the cross as a multiplication sign, try to get out of that habit. As the problems get longer, this will make more sense. All right? We're going to look at the next one. First of all, this is tricky. When you look at this, we've got to count up the negatives. Here is 1. Here is 1 negative. How many negatives are right here? 2. And the reason there are 2 is because it is multiplied twice. That gives us a total of 3 negatives, which is going to give us a negative answer. Now I can pretend all my numbers are positive and just work with them. So first of all, I'll do something like this. 3 squared is 9. Times 1 over 27 times 12. Put 1s under here. Do you know how to cancel from here?
Yeah.
Yes, this is easy. What goes into 9 and 27?
3.
9. So this goes into itself once, into 27 3 times. And what goes into 3 and 12?
3.
3. So now I'm crossing this out. It's a 1. And this is a 4. And out of all this, I've got 1 times 1 times 4 on top, and 1 times 1 times 1 on the bottom, which is 1, and we don't need it. If the bottom is 1, it just goes away. So this is negative 4.
Why did you make 1 over 27 negative?
I didn't make it negative. What's negative is we figured out we have 2 negatives here and a third negative here. So my whole answer is negative. Now I can just do my multiplication with positive numbers because I already know the sign of my answer. All right, let's do some practice problems. This is brutal, this first one, because there's minuses. This is not all multiplication. This one is a minus. All right, I have minus and negative, which is really plus a positive. Out of this, we know from order of operations to do the multiplication first. So I've got 19 times 12. All right, that's a great opportunity to use a calculator. 228. So this is positive or negative 228?
Negative. Positive.
Positive, because there's 2 negatives. So 228 plus 12. Now I'm just going to add, I can do this mentally. 240, right? What do I do first here?
You distribute. No, you don't. You cancel. No, you don't. You FOIL.
Wait. Do the stuff in front.
Do the stuff in the parentheses. Remember the order of operations. So I'm going to do this and this. All right? So I've got negative 2 times negative 2 plus 5 is 3. And then I've got negative 2 minus 5, which is negative 7. How many negatives am I now multiplying?
2.
2. So my answer is positive. 2 times 3 is 6, times 7 is 42. Positive 42. All right. In the next section of problems, we are going to use the distributive property to simplify. So when we distribute, first thing here, negative 7 times negative 5a, 2 negatives makes a positive
35.
35a. Then I've got negative 7 times 1 gives me negative 7, so put minus 7. This one has a bunch of negatives in it. Let me show you how we're going to go through this. First of all, My distribution is here and here. Now, the first one is never the problem. Realize when you do your distribution here, you are not distributing a 3. You are distributing a -3. Okay? So, negative x times negative 3y is positive 3xy. Then I've got negative x times negative 4 is positive 4x. I've got negative 3 times negative y gives me positive 3y. And negative 3 times negative 4x gives me positive 12x. Now, when you finish distributing, you should always look for like terms. Do I have any?
Yeah.
Yes. I've got a 4x and a 12x. I can combine those by adding their coefficients. 12 and 4 is 16, so 16x. So this is 3xy plus 16x plus 3y. And we are done. All right, very last one. This always gives people problems because there's fractions. And in general, I know even Algebra 2 students do not like the fraction.
They're the
All right.
worst thing.
Let me help you.
She was terrible. Can we make them into decimals?
No, you cannot make them into decimals.
Didn't you say yesterday you have to do, if it starts in a fraction or it's given in a fraction, you have to end with
That is what I said. If it starts with a fraction or is given in a fraction, you have to end with a fraction. So make these fractions by putting a 1 under them. When you distribute, which will be like this, okay, you're going to multiply your numerators and you're going to multiply your two denominators. All right? So, first of all, negative times positive is negative. 1 times 12x squared is 12x squared. 4 times 1 is 4. Negative times negative is positive. 1 times 48x is 48x. 4 times 1 on the bottom is 4. Negative times positive is negative. 1 times 2 is 2 on the top. 4 times 1 is 4 on the bottom. From here, you want to simplify, all right? How many times does 4 go into 12? 3. So that's a 1, that's a 3. How many times does 4 go into 48? 12. So this is a 1, this is a 12. How many times does 2 go into 4?
Oh, you have.
So this is a 1, this is a 2, and we have 1/2. So here's our simplified expression. This equals negative 3x squared plus 12x minus 1/2.
Oh, that's it.